Welcome back to the Indian Wisdom Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Raj Balkaran, founder of the Indian Wisdom School. And today we're going to hear a story about a king. Why are there so many stories about kings? Well, kingship represents leadership, represents governance. And mm, like it or not, proper leadership, proper governance, proper management is a need, not a want. Um, in large part, the effectiveness of any operation or state or municipality, etc., any body is it depends largely on the effectiveness of the king, of the ruler, of the CEO, of the mayor, of the prime minister, of the etc., etc. And so, whenever the person in charge is out of whack, things are out of whack in general. So it seems. I'm sure you all can relate to this in some way, shape, or form. This story was actually told. Was told in the stories behind the poses for cow face pose, Gomukasana. Let me just read it to you and comment as I go, as I usually do. So once upon a time, there was a man named Vina, and Vina was power hungry. Isn't it a sad truth that those who are least suited to govern are the ones who are most eager to clamber to such positions? This man was power hungry. He conquered all the lands he could and declared himself sovereign over the world. Interesting. Clearly a very humble figure. He was a self-serving tyrant, the sort of person least suited for power. Because when you think of what power's purpose is the protection of the collective, right? To my mind, that is the ultimate justification and purpose and function of power, the protection of the welfare and the functioning of the collective. That could take on a variety of hues, but to my mind, they're all variations of that same theme. And one who is heavily self-invested, I mean, self-invested in the sense of, in a toxic sense, self-confidence is a wonderful thing. Self-esteem is a wonderful thing. It's necessary. Taking stock of one's gifts and skills is wonderful. And false modesty isn't a service to anybody. It's just the opposite side of the toxic coin of false humility. False humility. Sure, yeah. Please come to my Airbnb. It's kind of okay. How's the person supposed to know it's lovely there unless you tell them it's a lovely space, it's well organized, it's airy, and maybe these are some of the flaws or what have you. But false modesty, false humility, they're both two sides of the same coin where ego gets in the way of the truth of your being or who you are. But those who are really invested in ego, how could they also be looking out for the welfare of the collective, right? So those in these positions are at least suited for these positions, those who seek these positions and covet them the most, right? But these are exactly the folks who end up scrambling to the top. We do have exceptions of highly principled men and women who seek to serve, who by some grace, especially in our times, are able to wield power in the world. But all too often, those who wield power in the world, especially in our times, it seems. Actually, no, I take that back. I think this is a phenomenon that has occurred throughout history, right? Those who wield power are highly ill-suited for it, right? So here's an ancient Indic vision of a variation of the same theme that you might see in modern politics, for example. This king, this person, this Vina, who's now this self-coordinated king, he taxed the citizens mercilessly and raped and pillaged the earth for his own gain. He was constantly digging for silver and gold and precious gems. He did as he pleased, without regard for the welfare of his citizens. Charming fellow, isn't he? He became so conceited that one day he called all of the sages, or the sort of the priestly advisors, into the court and decreed that they were no longer to perform Vedic sacrifices. No Vedic sacrifices. My goodness, what's this all about? He informed them that since he was richer and greater than the gods of heaven, hubris writ large here, it was he who should be worshipped. The sages tried to reason with him, explaining that the rituals upheld the very rhythms of the cosmos, and without them, calamity would surely ensue. King Vina didn't care about any of that, as long as he had the riches, position, and attention he needed to satisfy his ego. Does it sound very familiar to anybody? And so, under fear of death, penalty of death, the sages immediately discontinued their sacred rituals. With the ceasing of the sacred rituals, I think this is a profound concept that human actions, and particularly human actions in general, and in particular human ritual or spiritual actions. I mean, by extension, that could also be meditation or a mantra. It's a fascinating concept. The idea that we are part of a collective consciousness. The cosmos is conscious. We are sort of you know drops in that cosmic ocean, and that somehow our actions and the ways in which they impact consciousness will have effects on the planet at the very least, if not beyond. So goes the theorization. Right? So the sages try to warn him about this. Right? But with ceasing the sacred rites, the atmosphere changed around the world. The lands heated up and the rain stopped falling. Mother Earth, already depleted thanks to King Vina's greedy excavations, suffered still more greatly from the cessation of the rains. At her wits' end and exhausted by Vina's abuse, she turned herself into a cow and ran away to protect herself from the madness. What does a cow symbolize to you? Well, to many, it symbolizes food, I suppose. It's difficult for humans to understand that it's entirely culturally defined which animals are pets, which animals are food, until you go to a different culture. And what you call a pet is actually someone else's dinner, and what you call food is actually someone else's pet. And people think that this is just the way things are. This is just cultural conditioning sense. But in the Indian context, cows traditionally are venerated for their capacity to nurture and their the manner in which they represent motherhood to their calves and also to humans, because you know when we're done drinking breast milk, what milk do we drink? And so they are a powerful symbol also because from the cow comes milk, from the milk comes butter, from the butter comes ghee or clarified butter, which is um, delicious, useful for moisturizing, and also indispensable to the Vedic sacrifice. Right, it's also combustible, and it's part of the sacrificial offerings. So there's the cow. So Mother Earth turns herself into a cow, another symbol of motherhood. Part of why this narrative came to mind today is because it happens to be the Navaratri 9 nights goddess festival in Indic culture, where, to my mind, the only living, thriving um, technically cult of the Great Mother exists. I mean, not just a goddess, but the goddess, the mother of the universe, that sort of idea. And fascinates me and intrigues me that such a phenomenon would thrive with such a force within a very patriarchal context historically. But nevertheless, here we are, and we're lucky to be able to experience this vibrant tradition. And so it also reminds us to honor the feminine, whatever that looks like to us, whether women in particular or nurturance or the earth, certainly. Yeah. And so when Mother Earth withdrew energy from the planet, and she did that because she was so exhausted by Venus' abuse, and she turned into a cow to run away to protect herself from his madness. So she withdraws her energy from the planet. What happens? The crops wither, and the lakes and rivers dry out. Calamity looms across the land. Citizens starve, and nature is thrown into imbalance. You might see some correlations to modern times in a sense. But King Bina didn't care. All he cared about was himself. and the power he wielded over others. He already amassed a storehouse of grain that would last for years, so he was content to sit back and let the earth perish, and his citizens with it. Sound familiar? The court sages were livid. They could not sit around and allow the world to crumble. They needed to remove King Bina, but they had a problem. You know, in ancient Indic thought, there is the issue of violence. Violence is important and necessary for rulership, and so it is the pension to the privilege to duty of the king, the ruler, the administrator, the warrior, the kshatriya. But thanks to ascetic ideology and ascetic influences, a nonviolence or himsa is considered of supreme moral importance. To do no harm, categorical nonviolence. And so, one hand washes the other. The Brahmins perfect nonviolence. I mean, in the social imaginaire or the literary imaginaire, and in the narrative, anyways, in the ideals of the Hindu world, the Brahmins pursue nonviolence, but they can only do so if they're protected from harm by violent means if necessary. And that's the job of the Kshatriyas. So one hand washes the other, so to speak, in these two upper echelons of the caste hierarchy, right? So the sages now have a problem. Okay. It's the king's job to protect the sages. But in the absence of such protection, the sages have to protect themselves and the realm. So what do? This is a really cool idea. There's this sacred grass. There's all kinds of herbal substances, vegetation. There's all sorts of leaves and grasses that are used in various Vedic rituals. There's a very common one called kusha grass. It's used today. We see it in the ancient texts. So they take a blade of grass. It's interesting because it's a blade of grass, right? How innocuous is grass? We all walk upon it. It's sort of it's part of the part of the earth itself, actually. So they pluck a blade of grass from the withering fields and consecrate it with special mantras. And they plunge the blade of grass into King Vina's heart. Imagine the mantras somewhat fortify the blade. Okay, the king is dead. What now? Now we have another problem. Who's going to replace him? Vina had no heir. So they performed a ritual using Vina's corpse, churning it to procure an heir. Sort of a fascinating, if not unsavory idea. Think of this symbolically. Okay. At first, their churning yielded a wicked dwarf, which was the crystallization of Vina's vice. The kind of sort of when you have two metals that are alloyed and you need to unalloy them. So, they churn him down and they kind of divide out his wicked dwarf vice and work with the remainder, right? Human minus vice is what? Virtuous for the most part. I think we all have virtue and vice, but it seems to be that the more vice you have, the less virtue you have, and vice versa. Sometimes it's localized to a particular area of life, and sometimes it sort of infects the complex as a whole. Okay. So they got this wicked dwarf that they churn out, and then after some time, a handsome, noble, kingly figure emerges. They named him Prithu and installed him as the very first consecrated Indian king. It's interesting, right? This narrative holds the wisdom that even before the first legitimate ruler, consecrated ruler, was established, there was what? Individuals seeking power and running amok. Right? King Prithu well understood that the primary dharma of the king is to protect. Clearly, he went to just Ivy League schools and he went to all the great online platforms like the Indian Wisdom School and this, who knows? Clearly, he was well educated. Maybe the churning just smacks some sense into him, who knows? But he well understood that the primary dharma of the king is to protect citizens, sages, and even the earth itself whenever the need arises. His first order as king was to have the sages immediately resume the sacred rituals. He needed all the blessings he could get, given the dire calamity he had inherited. His citizens were starving, and Mother Earth had withdrawn her energy from the planet. It was by the divine sight of one of the sages, Prithu came to know that Mother Earth had taken the form of a cow to gallop far away from Vina and his treachery. So Prithu mounted his horse and set out to find her. I suppose that makes sense in that horses are faster than cows and he can catch up with her no problem. Perhaps his SUV was in the shop. King Prithu searched far and wide without rest until he spotted the divine embodiment of the fecundity of the earth itself. As he approached her, he trotted away. She trotted away more quickly, for fear of being abused further. The king cut her off at a pass and spoke these words: "Great mother, fear not. I am not the vile Vina. I am his successor Prithu. I come in peace and respect to beseech you to please return and rejuvenate the earth. My people are dying without your grace. Lord Prithu, I can do no such thing." This is what she says. This is how she answers. "I can do no such thing. For which sensible, self respecting, sentient being would allow themselves to be abused? I can be raped and pillaged no more, and so I must flee." It's interesting, right? You know, the dharma of parenthood, motherhood certainly is to prioritize the needs and to a large extent the wants of the young. But as we grow older, some parents allow children to abuse them, thinking that this is their dharma, and some are able to set boundaries while still showing love and acceptance and compassion. It's a very, very, very difficult balance to get right. But she's all giving Mother Earth, but she's like, "Well, I'm not here to be abused. I didn't sign up for that." "Mother, hear me out," Prithu replied. "I ache knowing of your abuse at the greedy hands of King Vina. I do not approach you for riches or gold, only food for my starving people. It is not in the spirit of greed I address you, but in the spirit of need. You have my solemn word that as king I will protect you and ensure that my citizens reap your bounty in a reasonable manner. And so it will be for all of my successors." Seeing the sincerity in King Prithu's eyes, the divine cow, Mother Earth in this form, spoke these words: "A mother's duty is to unconditionally love, accept, and nurture all of her children, and so I have for countless millennia. A mother's duty is not to accept abuse from anyone, least of all her own children. Moved by your words and trusting your promise, I will submit to you to be milked, so that the earth may be replenished. But though cows may consent to give milk, they must be fed and honored in return. I accept you as my protector, and from this day forth, I will be known as Prithvi, the ward of Prithu and his heirs." Prithvi is one of the names for the earth. "But remember this: should you ever abuse me again, the people of earth shall suffer from fire and famine and flood and disease." Interesting. Prithu was overjoyed at Mother Earth's return, as were the people of Earth. He protected the welfare of the earth for the rest of his days and ensured that he passed down Prithvi's pledge to his heirs. He passed the wisdom down. I think this is a fascinating tale, and I think it's a timely one. My sense is that um, it's not my sense. I think it's probably objectively the case to most of us that we have transgressed our boundaries as a species with respect for reverence and respect and interdependence with other species and particularly the earth itself, right? We have tended to view ourselves, particularly in Western culture, because of the scaffolding of Western scriptures. We tend to view ourselves, culturally speaking, as separate from the earth and forget that we are part and parcel of nature. Forget that we are interdependent and that when we upset the balance of that interdependence, there are dire consequences that we are currently facing. Some of us are facing, some of us are not facing. But it is these consequences, this challenge that we face, we will surmount. It may take a century or two, but we will get there. That is my feeling or my hope. Um, but in order to get there, we have to restore the consciousness of reverence for the earth that Western traditions have so demonized as nature worship or nature veneration. And yet, who among us is not called to awe at majestic mountains or inspiring sunrise? Who among us doesn't rightly drop to our knees and revere this glorious earth with which we have been gifted? And so it is time to reclaim that heritage. It is time that we heed the wisdom of the ancients and the common sense of modernity and perhaps even science itself. And first learn to honor the sacred feminine in general, maybe the earth in particular, so that we can have the consciousness needed to come up with the solutions, the technological and social solutions to address the crisis at hand. Well, I hope you've enjoyed that tale. Um, keep well and feel free to reach out if I can be of service. Maybe you'd like to study with me at the Indian Wisdom School, indianwisdomschool.com. I'm often asked to do lectures, guest lectures, talks. Feel free to reach out. And also, if you have any requests for future podcast ideas or stories, by all means, let me know. Okay. Namaste for now.